The first sign that something was wrong came quietly, almost like a whisper in the system. It was a normal Monday morning, and people across the country were going about their usual routines. Workers were buying breakfast, business owners were opening their shops, and students were paying for transport. But when the first few people tried to use their bank cards, something strange happened. The machines froze. Screens flickered. Then, without warning, transactions failed. At first, it seemed like a small technical issue, the kind that happens sometimes and gets fixed quickly. No one expected it to grow into something much bigger. Inside the main banking headquarters, alarms started to go off. Not loud sirens, but digital alerts flashing red across computer monitors. IT staff rushed to their desks, typing quickly, trying to understand what was happening. Systems were slowing down, then shutting off one by one. Customer accounts became inaccessible. Balances could not be viewed. Transfers stopped working completely. It was as if the entire system was being slowly choked from the inside. At the center of it all, hidden far from the chaos, was a single figure sitting in a dimly lit room. The glow from multiple screens reflected in their eyes. Their face remained calm, almost expressionless, as lines of code scrolled rapidly across the monitors. This was no accident. Every delay, every failure, every shutdown was planned. The hacker had spent months, maybe even years, studying the country's banking network. Inside the control room of one of the largest banks, a young cybersecurity analyst noticed something unusual: a pattern. It was small at first, easy to miss, but it kept repeating. He leaned closer to his screen, his heart starting to race, as he realized this was not just a system failure. This was a deliberate attack, and it was still happening in real time. The young cybersecurity analyst stared at his screen, his eyes moving quickly as he followed the strange pattern. It was not random at all. The system logs showed small entries appearing at regular times, almost like footsteps. Someone was moving inside the banking network, opening doors that should never be opened. He called his supervisor immediately, trying to stay calm, but his voice gave away his fear. Within minutes, more experts gathered around his desk, all looking at the same screen, all realizing the same thing. This was not just a problem anymore. It was an attack that was still happening, and it was growing. The team quickly began to track the activity. They tried to trace where the hacker was coming from, but every time they followed the signal, it disappeared and reappeared somewhere else. It was like chasing a shadow. The hacker was using multiple paths, hiding behind layers of protection, making it almost impossible to find their true location. Each time the team thought they were getting closer, the trail went cold. Frustration began to build in the room as time passed, and the situation outside grew worse. Across the country, the effects of the attack were becoming more serious. Businesses could not operate properly. Some shops closed early because they could not accept payments. Fuel stations struggled as customers could not pay for fuel. Hospitals started to worry because some of their systems were connected to banking services for billing and supply orders. Even government payments were affected. The entire economy was starting to slow down, and people were beginning to panic. News channels picked up the story, and soon everyone was talking about the same thing: a mysterious failure in the banking system that no one could explain. Back inside the banking headquarters, the cybersecurity team decided to take stronger action. They began shutting down parts of the network to stop the spread of the attack. It was a risky move, but they had no choice. If they did nothing, the hacker would continue to move freely. One by one, servers were disconnected. Systems went offline. For a moment, it seemed like things were getting under control. The strange activity slowed down, and the team felt a small sense of relief. But it did not last long. Suddenly, new alerts appeared. This time, they were worse. The hacker had anticipated the shutdown. Instead of being stopped, they had moved deeper into the system before the shutdown began. Now they were inside the core, the most important part of the banking network. This was where all the critical data was stored, including account details, transaction records, and security keys. If the hacker gained full control here, the damage could be permanent. The room went silent as everyone understood the danger. The analyst who first noticed the pattern felt a heavy weight on his shoulders. He knew they were running out of time. Every second mattered now. The team started working faster, trying to isolate the core system, but it was not easy. The hacker seemed to know exactly what they were doing. Every move the team made was matched by a countermove. It was like a game of chess, but the opponent was always one step ahead. At the same time, a special government cyber unit was brought in to assist. These were some of the best experts in the country. They arrived quickly and took control of the situation, coordinating with the bank's team. They brought advanced tools and began analyzing the attack in more detail. What they found was shocking. The code being used by the hacker was highly advanced, unlike anything they had seen before in a normal cyber attack. It was carefully designed, almost like a custom-built weapon. As they studied the code, they discovered something else. Hidden deep inside the program was a timer. It was counting down slowly, and no one knew what would happen when it reached 0. The realization sent a wave of fear through the room. This was not just about disrupting the system. There was something bigger planned, something that had not happened yet. Meanwhile, the hacker remained calm, watching everything unfold through their screens. They could see the panic, the attempts to stop them, the confusion spreading through the system. But none of it seemed to bother them. Their fingers moved steadily across the keyboard, executing commands with precision. They were not just reacting anymore, they were preparing for the next stage. Back in the control room, the young analyst leaned back for a moment, trying to think clearly. He replayed the pattern in his mind, the way the hacker moved, the way they avoided detection. There had to be something they were missing, something small but important. He leaned forward again, his eyes scanning the data one more time, determined to find a weakness. As the timer continued to count down, the pressure in the room grew heavier. Every decision felt critical. Every mistake could make things worse. Outside, the country was slowly coming to a standstill, with people waiting for answers that no one could give yet. And deep inside the system, hidden behind layers of code, the hacker moved closer to whatever final step they had been planning all along. The room felt heavier with every passing minute as the timer continued to count down. The numbers moved slowly, but everyone in the control room could feel time slipping away faster than ever. The government cyber unit took full control of the main system, giving direct orders to the bank's IT team. Screens were filled with lines of code, system maps, and alerts flashing in red. Every person in that room knew they were facing something far beyond a normal cyber attack. This was precise, controlled, and deeply planned. The young analyst who first noticed the pattern could not stop thinking about it. He moved away from the main group for a moment and focused on a smaller screen, replaying the attack logs again and again. He noticed that the hacker never moved randomly. Every step followed a path, like a route that had been drawn long before the attack even started. It was not just skill, it was preparation. The hacker knew the system better than anyone inside that building. He began to trace the path backward, not forward like the others were doing. Instead of trying to catch where the hacker was going, he tried to understand where they first entered. It was difficult because the hacker had covered their tracks very well, but small traces still remained. Tiny pieces of code, almost invisible, were left behind like fingerprints. The analyst followed them slowly, carefully, afraid of making a mistake. Then he found something unusual. The entry point was not from outside the country, as everyone had assumed. It was from inside. This discovery changed everything. He quickly called the team and showed them what he had found. The room filled with tension again as the experts looked at the data. The hacker had gained access using an internal system, something that should have been completely secure. That meant one of two things. Either someone from inside had helped the hacker, or the hacker had been inside the system long before the attack began, waiting silently. The government team immediately began checking internal access records. They looked at employee accounts, security logs, and system activity from the past several months. At first, nothing seemed out of place. But then they found a single account that showed strange behavior. It belonged to a former employee who had left the bank almost a year ago. According to the records, the account should have been disabled, but somehow it was still active, hidden deep in the system where no one had noticed it. The name of the former employee was Daniel Kiro. He had worked as a systems engineer, someone who understood the structure of the banking network very well. Reports showed that he had left quietly, with no problems or complaints. But now, his account was being used as a gateway for the attack. The team quickly searched for more information about him, but there was very little. It was as if he had disappeared after leaving the job. While this discovery gave the team a new direction, it also made the situation more dangerous. If the hacker had insider knowledge, then they could predict almost every move the defense team would make. It explained why the attack felt one step ahead at all times. The hacker was not guessing, they were anticipating. At the same time, the timer continued to count down. The cyber unit focused their attention on it, trying to understand its purpose. They carefully analyzed the code surrounding the timer and finally uncovered part of its function. It was connected to the central database, the heart of the banking system. When the timer reached 0, it would trigger a command that could either erase critical data or lock the entire system permanently. The exact result was still unclear, but both possibilities were catastrophic. The pressure in the room reached a new level. Now they were not just trying to stop an attack, they were racing against a countdown that could destroy the country's financial system. The lead expert ordered immediate action. They had to disable the timer before it reached 0. But the problem was that the timer was protected by layers of encryption. Trying to remove it directly could trigger it instantly. Meanwhile, the hacker continued their work without interruption. From their hidden location, they watched as the system struggled to respond. Their plan was moving forward exactly as expected. They had planted the timer deep within the system, knowing it would create fear and force the defenders into difficult decisions. Every move they made was part of a larger strategy. Back in the control room, the young analyst returned to the pattern once again. Something about it still felt incomplete. He realized that the hackers' movements were not just about gaining control. They were also sending a message. The pattern repeated in a way that almost looked like a code within a code. He began to break it down, separating each step, each movement, each delay. After several tense minutes, he noticed something that made his heart beat faster. The pattern was not random at all. It formed a sequence, almost like coordinates or instructions. He quickly shared his idea with the team, and they began to analyze it together. As they decoded the sequence, a hidden message started to appear. It was not a typical message. It was more like a signature, a mark left behind by the hacker. It confirmed what they were already beginning to suspect. This attack was not just about money or disruption. It was personal. The hacker wanted to be known, but not in a simple way. They wanted their actions to be understood. At the same time, the investigation into Daniel Kiro continued. The government team managed to find an old address connected to him, a small apartment in the city, now abandoned. Officers were sent there immediately, hoping to find clues. When they arrived, they found the place empty, but not completely. Inside, there were old computer parts, notes, and diagrams covering the walls. It looked like a place where someone had spent a long time planning something very detailed. Among the papers, they found sketches of the banking system, drawn by hand. There were markings, circles, and arrows showing paths through the network. It matched what they were seeing in the attack. This confirmed that Daniel Kiro had been planning this for a long time, even before he left his job. Back at the headquarters, the timer showed less time remaining now. The room was filled with tension as every expert worked at full speed. The young analyst kept studying the hidden pattern, feeling that it might hold the key to stopping everything. There was something more in it, something they had not fully understood yet. And as the numbers on the timer continued to fall, the hacker prepared to take the next step, one that would push the entire system closer to the edge. The timer was now dangerously close to 0, and every second felt heavier than the last. Inside the control room, no one spoke unless it was necessary. The only sounds were the fast tapping of keyboards and the quiet beeping of machines. The team had reached a point where there was no room for error. One wrong move could trigger the very thing they were trying to stop. The pressure was intense, but they had no choice except to keep going. The young analyst focused deeply on the hidden pattern he had discovered. He could feel that it was more than just a signature. There was meaning behind it, something the hacker wanted them to see. As he looked closer, he realized the sequence was not just numbers or coordinates. It was structured in a way that pointed to a specific part of the system, one that had not been checked yet. It was a section of the network that handled backup processes, usually ignored during active operations because it stayed in the background. He quickly informed the team, and they shifted their attention to that hidden area. At first, everything looked normal, but as they dug deeper, they found a concealed process running quietly. It was connected to the timer, but it was separate from the main attack. This process acted like a mirror, copying parts of the system and storing them somewhere unknown. The realization was shocking. The hacker was not only trying to destroy or lock the system, but also possibly taking important data at the same time. The government cyber unit acted fast. They began isolating the backup system, cutting off its connection to the rest of the network. It was a risky move because it could also affect recovery options if something went wrong. But they had no choice. Allowing the process to continue could mean losing sensitive financial data forever. As they worked, the hacker responded quickly. New lines of code appeared, trying to reconnect the process, fighting against the shutdown. For the first time since the attack began, the team felt like they were pushing back. It was not easy, and the hacker was still ahead in many ways. But this small discovery gave them hope. They were no longer just reacting. They had found a piece of the plan, and now they could interfere with it. At the same time, officers searching Daniel Kiro's abandoned apartment found something else hidden behind a loose wall panel. It was a small storage device. When they connected it to a secure system, they discovered files filled with detailed notes. Among them was a message, written in simple words, but carrying a strong meaning. It spoke about anger, betrayal, and a system that had failed him. It was clear now that this attack was not only about skill or power. It was driven by something personal. Back in the control room, the timer continued to drop, but now the team had a new target. The hidden process in the backup system was directly linked to the final trigger. If they could stop it, they might be able to stop everything. The young analyst worked closely with the lead expert, combining their ideas, trying to find a way to break through the encryption without setting off the timer. The hacker, watching from the shadows, paused for a moment. This was the first real challenge to the plan. Their fingers hovered over the keyboard, then moved again, faster this time. The next phase had to begin before control was lost. The control room was filled with tension as the final minutes approached. The timer was now counting down its last moments, and everyone could feel the weight of what was about to happen. The young analyst and the lead expert worked side by side, their eyes fixed on the hidden process inside the backup system. They knew this was their only chance. If they failed here, the entire banking system could collapse, and the damage would spread across the country. Carefully, they began to break down the encryption step by step. They avoided rushing, knowing that one mistake could trigger the timer immediately. The analyst used the pattern he had discovered earlier, applying it in a new way. Instead of just reading it, he used it to predict how the hacker had built the system. Slowly, they started to understand the logic behind the code. It was complex, but it followed a structure, one that reflected the hacker's thinking. At the same time, the government cyber unit worked on another plan. If they could not fully stop the timer, they would try to contain the damage. They began preparing emergency protocols to isolate the core system completely. This would protect some parts of the network, even if others failed. It was not a perfect solution, but it was better than losing everything. The seconds continued to fall. The room grew quieter, as if everyone was holding their breath. Then suddenly, the analyst saw something. A small opening in the code, hidden within layers of security. It was like a back door, but not one the hacker had intended for others to find. It was part of the system design, something left unnoticed for years. He pointed it out quickly, and the team moved to use it. With careful precision, they redirected the hidden process through that opening. It was a risky move, but it allowed them to separate the timer from the core system without directly touching it. For a brief moment, everything froze. The screen stopped updating, and no one knew if it had worked or if they had just triggered the final stage. Then the timer stopped. It did not reach zero. It simply froze in place. The room remained silent for a second, then filled with quiet relief. But no one celebrated yet. They knew the situation was not fully over. The hacker was still inside the system, and there was no guarantee they would not try again. In the hidden room, the hacker stared at their screen as the timer stopped moving. For the first time, there was a small change in their expression. The plan had been interrupted, not completely destroyed, but damaged. They paused, thinking quickly, adjusting to this new situation. Their fingers hovered over the keyboard, deciding the next move carefully. Back in the control room, the team began securing the system, locking down every access point they could find. The young analyst leaned back slightly, exhausted but focused. He knew they had only delayed something bigger. The hacker had not come this far just to stop now. As the system slowly stabilized, a new alert appeared on the screen, different from the others, carrying a message that no one had expected to see. The message on the screen was short, but it caught everyone's attention immediately. It appeared in plain text, without any code or encryption around it, as if the hacker wanted to be clearly understood. It read, "You were not supposed to stop it." The room fell silent again, but this time it was not fear alone. There was also a sense that this was not the end. The hacker was still watching, still connected, and still in control of something. The government cyber unit reacted quickly. They began scanning the entire system again, searching for any remaining access points. Firewalls were strengthened, passwords were reset, and every active session was forced to close. They wanted to push the hacker out completely to make sure there was no way back in. But the system was large and complex, and there was always the chance that something had been missed. The young analyst stared at the message, thinking deeply. It did not sound like anger, it sounded like disappointment. That made him uneasy. He remembered the files found in Daniel Kiro's apartment, the notes filled with frustration and pain. This attack had been personal from the beginning. Stopping the timer had not ended that feeling. It had only interrupted the plan. As the team continued their work, they noticed something strange. Even though the timer had stopped and the main attack was under control, small parts of the system were still behaving oddly. Some data was missing, not large amounts, but enough to raise concern. It became clear that while the team had focused on stopping the main threat, the hidden process in the backup system had already completed part of its task before being cut off. The realization spread quickly through the room. The hacker had not failed completely. They had taken something before being stopped. No one knew exactly what had been copied or where it had been sent. It could be account details, transaction histories, or even security information. The damage was not as visible as a system crash, but it could be just as dangerous over time. At the same moment, in a quiet location far away, the hacker leaned back in their chair. Multiple screens displayed the final results of the operation. Some parts of the plan had been stopped, but not all. A small amount of data had been successfully transferred, just enough to serve a purpose. The hacker closed one program after another, leaving no clear trace behind. Back in the control room, the system was slowly returning to normal. Basic functions were coming back online, and banks began to reconnect their services. Outside, people were still confused and worried, but things were starting to move again. The country had avoided a complete disaster, but the impact of the attack would be felt for a long time. The young analyst sat quietly, watching the screen stabilize. He knew this was not just a victory, it was a warning. Someone with enough knowledge and patience had come very close to bringing everything down. And even though they had been stopped this time, there was no guarantee it would not happen again. As the investigation continued and authorities searched for Daniel Kiro, one question remained in everyone's mind. If this attack was only part of a larger plan, then what had the hacker truly achieved, and what were they still planning to do next?